Welcome to World of DaaS, a show for data enthusiasts. I'm your host, Auren Hoffman, CEO of SafeGraph and GP of Flex Capital. For more conversations, videos, and transcripts, visit safegraph.com/podcasts. Hello, fellow data nerds. My guest today is Erik Torenberg. Erik is a partner and co-founder at Village Global. He's also the author of a super excellent Substack, which I'm a big subscriber of, and co-host of Moment of Zen podcasts, along with many others. Erik is also the founder and chairman of On Deck. Erik, welcome to World of DaaS.
Auren, thanks for having me. I'm a big fan of the show and excited to be on.
I'm excited as well. Now, you wrote a super piece on Substack called Reconsidering Career Optionality. Why do you think optionality is so overrated?
Well, I think that people misunderstand what optionality actually is because we're not good at sort of pricing risk, either in a macro or a micro context. And so I think when people think of optionality, it's because they're afraid to kind of make hard decisions. And so they say things like, I don't know what I'll do with my life, so I'll get a degree. I don't know what I'll do with my degree, so I'll get a grad degree or get an MBA. I don't know what I'll do with this MBA, so I'll go into consulting or finance or some safe FANG company to figure out what I want to do. And I think the biggest challenge of pursuing optionality is that it prevents you from taking risks. And so in focusing so much to acquire options to cap your downside, you also cap your upside by being too comfortable to take risks, both lifestyle-wise and reputationally. There's this great tweet that this woman, Julie Young, made a long time ago that said, I don't know one successful person who didn't look dumb for some period of time. And when you focus on pursuing optionality, you are less likely to look dumb. If your end goal, let's say, is to be a founder, to start a company, the biggest risk is not that you won't get the right training by going to work at Facebook or something. It's that you don't take enough shots on goal, because most successful founders aren't successful or I should say a lot aren't successful right on the first try. It takes a few shots on goal. And so I think the last thing I'll say here is that people really misunderestimate the risk of failure. Like, does anyone remember Ning, Mark Andreessen's social network? Does anyone remember what is it called? Social Net, Reid Hoffman's dating site? You're remembered for your wins, not for your losses. But you need to take enough shots on goal such that you can have a chance to get some wins.
And also, the downside, the losses aren't so big.
Right.
It's not like you're going to go to jail or even have to pay back the investors yourself or something like that. The downside is you learn probably way more than you would learn from getting an MBA.
Exactly. Yeah. You actually build more optionality because people think, if you start a company and you fail, you're done or something, that's a negative blemish in your reputation. Whereas actually you're more respected and you've built a stronger network, right? Like I was, so my career kind of replacement, framework instead of pursuing optionality is to pursue asymmetric upside, which is this idea that pursuing an opportunity that has the chance of being a mega outcome for you, but if it doesn't work out, is actually a pretty great experience. And I'll say that Product Hunt was that for me. I was at Product Hunt. Product Hunt was the startup of the year in 2014. Like, people thought it was going to be this unicorn, and it totally was not. It was not even a big financial outcome at all. But it was this amazing opportunity to build such a strong network, such a strong community, and people really respect Product Hunt, even though it wasn't this massive outcome. And that has generated so much more career opportunities for me than going to Princeton or some great university or working at Goldman Sachs. And it would have been much harder for me to have gotten into Princeton or Goldman Sachs, and I would have had to work a lot harder at Princeton and Goldman Sachs to be successful. And that's when you pursue things that not a lot of people are doing, there's less competition and more opportunities to stand out and shine, and people respect that.
One of the things I see with smart people is they often they pass the marshmallow test, so they're all about delaying gratification.
Yes.
And so they work on something that they don't really like, they're not that interested in, but they think it's like a good thing for them to do. And I think for many of them, they think they're optimizing the long term, but really they're optimizing kind of the midterm.
Yeah.
They're delaying, they're not having fun with what they're doing. they think it's going to be good for, it's going to help them make partner at a law firm or something like that, but they're not really optimizing like the long-term piece.
Totally. And there's some subtle ways as well in which they're not optimizing the long term, which is they're putting themselves in peer groups of people they might not want to be like or might not want to end up. Now, if you want to be a partner at one of these firms, then you should go work at the firm and be around these people.
Yeah, absolutely. Nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, totally. And that's great. They do well and have good lives probably. But if you want to be a founder or be successful in some other field and you put yourself around people who are not going to pursue that path, it's going to be so much harder for you to go out and pursue that path. And that's why, if you want to be a founder, go join other people who also either are founders or want to be founders. And that momentum is going to carry you. As David Brooks once said, it's far easier to change your environment than your insides. And we often will calibrate ourselves or morph ourselves to match our environment or what our environment respects.
And it seems like people, when they're kind of optimizing for optionality, they're kind of doing things because they think it will help them a lot in the future, not necessarily because, for the pure enjoyment of that or for, whatever it might be. It's like, this is going to be something important on my resume. And I think partially it's especially people growing up, let's say in the last 20, in the last the 40 years or something like that. To get into college, you had to do all these like things that everyone expected you to do. You had to go play on a specific sports team. You had to study these types of things, and you even have to go, I don't know, to Costa Rica to help the turtles or something. And it just became this thing like where you have like there's this path that everyone knows, and you just follow the path. Do you think that is part of it, or is it something endemic in our culture? Or?
Yeah, it
seems like it's happening mostly to the smartest people, not to the. You would think these things would not afflict like the brightest, highest IQ people.
Yeah, I think it is part of a sort of checkbox culture that we've been raised in order to get to the best colleges. We have to, in order to get to the best colleges, you have to look smart along the way. But in order to build a massive company, sometimes you have to look dumb along the way. So it really is kind of a different skill set. And then it's also, it's people wanting to look smart to the broader public, to their parents, to people who can really recognize what these credentials mean. And then it's also the sort of propaganda that these big firms play, which is, hey, we have unique skills, that you will learn here that will help you be a better founder or whatever it is you want to do better than actually doing the founding or that sort of thing, which I think is not quite true, although there are some valuable skills that are learned. I think one example of optionality that people might not properly respect, but that worked out for a tremendous amount of people was getting into crypto in 2014 or 2015 or 2016 or 2017 even. Whereas I'll take someone like Kyle Samani, who started Multicoin. He one of the early crypto firms. At the time, I think he was unemployed. He was kind of early in his career, and he was taking this big bet. Now, the fascinating thing about crypto was this thing where, hey, if it worked out, people, there was a lot of money to be made, and for people who did make money or did work out, they made a lot of money. But even there's so many people who got so rich and they failed. I mean, it's so fascinating. Like, how many fields are there where you can become worth hundreds of millions or more, and your company failed, but you just owned enough of the kind of currency that the field operates in. And what was the cost? The biggest cost was just looking stupid. It was looking dumb. And so I think that's a good question to ask in general: is what are things I can pursue that look dumb to a set of people, but look smart to another set of people, and those are the people that I kind of respect. But there's asymmetric upside. If it works, it's going to be absolutely massive.
Part of optionality is if you think of like extreme optionality, it'd be doing things like delaying marriage, delaying having kids, right? Those are ways to really increase your optionality. And you see, like in the same cohort of people, they're often kind of following that in their personal life, not just in their work life as well.
Yeah, one of your end questions is for every show is what's bad advice that people say that I disagree with, and I have two bits, but I'll bring one of them now. And one of them is that making commitments actually expands optionality in some ways. David Brooks says what you chain yourself to sets you free. And so my, recommendations would be consider picking your career early, consider picking your partner early, consider picking your best friends early, because once you have those solidified, one, everything great compounds. So you get to compound those relationships and skills and opportunities. But two, you no longer have to search for it. I mean, how much time do people spend searching for their partner, dating hundreds of people, going on apps? I mean, and so you can use that time to do all sorts of other, noble pursuits with the people you've committed to and otherwise.
Now, you've also written a lot on kind of the idea of elites and elitism in society. How would you define an elite?
Yeah. Elite is used in different ways. The way I think about it is actually David Sachs' kind of formulation of there are, 1/3 of the country goes to college. 2/3 of the country does not go to college. The biggest polarization in this country is whether you went to college or not, in terms of the views that you're likely to have.
In a 4-year college, really.
Yes. And so when I'm talking about elites, I'm usually referring to college graduates, and usually college graduates of good schools.
Okay, so you're basically defining it fairly broadly, like a whole third of the population or something like that.
Yes, and maybe like 80% of people who went to college. So it's not all of them, but it's like a majority of people who went to college, who have a certain view set that actually does not represent the country, and yet they dominate the institutions that claim to represent the country and kind of impose a set of values onto the country.
And at least in the U.S., there does seem like there's a real bifurcation in society. Like if you go to a wedding from somebody who graduated from college, there'll be almost nobody who didn't graduate from college at that wedding, right? Except for maybe the crazy entrepreneur, but like at least who didn't get into a 4-year school or something like that. And vice versa is true as well. It seems like these societies sometimes don't even like talk to one another.
There's this great book called Coming Apart.
Great book. Love that.
That emphasizes, or that says, hey, it didn't used to be like this. There used to be much more, similarity among the different classes. But what happened over time is that we had a few things. One is college. We became more meritocratic in the sense that colleges were able to more precisely identify talent. Now, there's some ways we haven't become, or we're becoming less meritocratic, which we could talk about. But colleges basically sorted talent on IQ and conscientiousness. Those people then, married each other, which further divided people. And then they moved to the same locations, same cities, and moved other people out. And so the U.S. just became much more sorted on IQ and conscientiousness, and then on wealth, and that just compounds over time.
Yeah, even if you go to the public school in many neighborhoods, the public school, like almost 100% of the parents went to a 4-year college or something, right? Totally. Which is really interesting. Now, you have this piece of where you talk about the hypocrisy of the elites, which I really love. Can you break that down a bit?
Sure. So the hypocrisy of the elites is this idea that elites espouse a certain set of views and a certain set of policies that they themselves are insulated from.
Yep.
And so an example, I'll give you a few
examples. Or
don't
even follow or something.
Exactly. Yes.
Yep.
Insulated from, or don't even follow, or follow the opposite.
Yep.
And so an example, I'll give you a bunch of examples. Defund the police was largely, during the sort of George Floyd protests in 2020, was largely elite phenomenon. It was largely people who went
college educated.
Yes.
Yep.
College educated white people mostly, who were saying that. And yet it was that same group of people themselves that do not, live in areas where there are low police. They live in areas where there's the highest amount of police, maybe even gated communities that have, private security. And so
maybe at low crime. So maybe the police are not as important in the neighborhoods that they live in.
Yes. Another hypocrisy is that Rob Henderson has a study where he says that, or he quotes a study where he says that the richest people are most likely to say that success is about luck, as opposed to, lower income people are more likely to say success is about hard work. but who works the hardest? It's the richest people, probably, right? And so it's this, affluent people broadcasting kind of the values that they think will really be successful to their own kids, but a different set of values to
right. And they're pushing their kids to a crazy extent. Like, the elite, quote unquote elites, seem like they're pushing their kids way more than elites were in the past.
Totally.
And helicoptering them, getting them to work these crazy hours, play 17 sports and do all this other stuff today.
Totally. And then it gets more cultural, things like, elites promoting body positivity, the idea that being overweight might be fine or healthy, or yet they themselves work out the most or maintain perfect health or most obsessed with their health, or the idea that, it's like Al Gore talking most about climate and yet flying on his private jet. So it's all sorts of cultural.
I imagine the elites also have extremely high rates of marriage, lower rates of divorce, right? Those types of things.
Yes. And so that's on an individual level. And then on a macro level, like Harvard is a perfect example where they consider themselves on the forefront of promoting egalitarianism and social progress and uplifting the downtrodden. And yet they themselves are, and they promote inclusivity, et cetera. They themselves are perhaps the most exclusive organization on the planet, in the sense that, everyone would love to send their kid to Harvard. And they have this massive endowment. They could afford, increasing the student population by 5x or 10x or
certainly at least double. Like that would be no problem. Yeah.
And yet they don't do it because they're not really about including the amount people that want to go to that. That's not their main goal, even though that's a value that they claim to espouse. So those are just some examples of kind of the hypocrisy of this class, that I describe it like talk left, act right. Talk a big game about inclusivity or egalitarianism, and yet act in a way that's much more sort of cutthroat and kind of out for themselves.
Interesting. And I mean, humans are hypocrites in general. Like I've never met someone that isn't a complete hypocrite, right? Like that's who we are. Like so it's not super surprising that that's the case.
Yes, exactly.
Interesting. Okay. Well, you're also a big proponent of like startups in general. You kind of think more people should do a startup. Like, is there some sort of way in the water we can get more people to do that?
Yeah. So yes, I think more people should pursue startups. One, because it's it's a way to solve some of our biggest problems. Governments used to address big problems, but for lots of different reasons, whether it's talent, migration, or whether it's, institutional sclerosis, a lot of the problems like, space exploration or defense that used to be handled or progressed by the government are now progressed by startups.
And by used to, you're really talking about from like 1940 to 1980 or something, like a very brief moment of time when government did that, right?
Yes. And even the problems that people care most about, whether it's education or healthcare or housing, or a lot of the innovations are going to come from startups. And so more people should pursue startups. And then in terms of why don't they, there are a number of bottlenecks. So part of it is cultural. And my friends at Entrepreneur First, or our friends at Entrepreneur First, are trying to create sort of a rising culture of ambition in countries outside the U.S.
Yeah, they're basically saying like they're creating a track kind of like McKinsey, so it's easy for people to go into.
Yeah, so they're trying to raise the status of entrepreneurs, and I think we've done a great job of that in Silicon Valley, and that's why it's less risky to pursue a startup. Because even if you fail, like I spent 3 years of my life working on a startup that had rap battles on the internet. Like it's a pretty silly idea. And that's a long time to spend, I'm like in my early 30s. But that built me such a strong network and people respected it, and so raising the status is one thing. I think the other thing that's challenging is that the diversification perspective. So you build this network, but, more people are probably willing to cap their upside if they can cap their downside. So more people would probably rather be venture capitalists than founders.
Yeah.
Even on just an economic level, put aside the lifestyle. Yeah. Because venture capitalists kind of guaranteed get rich. And so I wonder if there's some way of doing that on the founder side as well. Like people have been talking about equity pooling among startups forever. I actually think that's a pretty interesting idea. Some worry that, hey, if you need to have it all on the line and, risk being poor to be a founder, I think there's some room to play there. And if startups, by being a founder, and some people do this by making their founders scouts and things
Yeah.
like that, if they can get a little bit more diversification, I think you would see more people starting companies.
Interesting. And so, and you think this idea of okay, only the bad founders are gonna do it, or something like that, like the future Mark Zuckerbergs would never. You never do this. You hear this all the time with this equity pooling. You think it's just a bunch of baloney?
I think the best founders are also economically rational,
Yeah.
to some degree. So if you say, hey,
Right. They have a says, hey, I have a 70% chance of failing or something, right?
Yes. They might think their chances are higher than other people of being successful, but even they understand that like they could fail.
Yeah.
And if they could take a small percentage, a very small percentage of their equity and diversify it among a pool of founders in their caliber set. Let's say you're a Sequoia-backed, founder, and you do this pool with other Sequoia-backed founders at a similar stage. I think that makes sense. Another way of doing it is just giving them scout programs, and that's something we've done at Village Global with some of our founders. Is allowing them to be investors, so you're getting diversification on that level. So I think there are different ways of doing it, and I think the best founders are economically rational, even if they highly rate their chance of being successful more than others.
And it shows, by the way, because like most of the best founders that we've seen, like they've done a secondary in their own company, right?
Yeah.
So they took, even if their company is super successful and it was going to continue to be super successful, they took something off the table.
Yes.
So it shows that they're actually very economically rational, and they have some sort of sense of like, putting something in the bank now.
Yeah, I wrote this post last week about Giannis Antetokounmpo, this NBA player for the Milwaukee Bucks, who, when he lost the series to the Miami Heat in the playoffs, they asked if it was a failure, and he said, "No, it's not a failure. It's just steps to success." And what I found so interesting about that was that if they had asked him before the series, if you had lost the series, will it be a failure? And he would say, yeah.
Of course, he would have said, yes. Yeah, he has to convince himself that. Otherwise, he wouldn't play so hard, right?
Totally. And so what I say is, like, deterministic mindset when you're a founder, or when you're like all in on something, or when you're still in the game. Probabilistic mindset when you're out of the game. Or when you're an investor. And so I think similarly, there's this thing here where when you're a founder, you need to like signal that you're freaking all in on this thing. This thing can't fail. You're not hedging at all. But I think in reality, if you could hedge like 1%, or something very small, where you're still like, hey, 98% or 95%, like everything's like, you're basically all in, but you've just hedged a little bit, I think is rational for most people.
And you're very interested in this idea of investing in people. You and I have had many conversations over the years about these ISAs, these income share agreements and stuff like that. They haven't really taken off. People have been talking about them for a really long time. What do you think is needed for ISAs to really become a thing, or do you think you need a whole new innovation, or do you think we need new laws, or what's holding it back?
Charlie Munger famously said, "Show me the incentives, I'll show you the outcome." And I've just been obsessed with how could you further align people on a common mission, right? Isn't that what the Joint Stock Corporation did by allowing employees to have equity in companies? You thus were able to get so many more people bought in on a mission and going all in on the mission, so that when a company like Facebook goes public, it's not just the owners or Zuckerberg who gets immensely wealthy, it's thousands of employees. And thus you're able to harness the best talent globally to focus on a mission. And that's incredible. And what crypto sort of introduced ideologically is this idea of, hey, maybe what if it's not just employees who got upside, but what if your customers or users got upside? In fact, maybe this is a way to compete with these network effects businesses, where you could be a user of a new social media product or marketplace, and you're providing value to this marketplace, and that's, you get compensated for it. And so I've been obsessed with this idea of incentive alignment. Reasons it has not been taken off, or reasons it has not taken off. I think legal is a huge one. I think that the structural barriers.
And there's always like weird tax things in there as well, right?
Yeah. And so, in fact, I think that's what a lot of people are excited about crypto is actually like legal, arbitrage.
Yeah, like a DAO or something.
Yeah, exactly. Or legal innovation. So I think that's the biggest barrier, in my opinion, from even just more experimentation here. I think there are some companies who've tried ISAs who've actually found kind of the darker incentives. Whereas, like, I know a boot camp who offered free education in exchange for ISA in the future, and incentivized a few students to get the education, and then complained so much that the education was bad that the school said, "Hey, you don't have to pay it anymore." And so there's some weird incentives that happen with that. But broadly, I think once we can get some legal workarounds, people are going to experiment with all sorts of ideas. Say like, hey, let's say we're 10 buddies, we just graduated college together, and we want to bet on each other, and let's pool. Let's pool our opportunities and stay connected and stay close to that. Or, hey, you Auren, you discover this person right out of college and you want to mentor them, but you also want to make it worth your while. They don't have a company yet. Maybe you can, get some upside in their next few years in exchange for giving them their break. And this idea of almost like, Kickstarter for people. Like, we have a massive student debt, crisis in this country, and debt that cripples them. You can't even discharge it in bankruptcy. And yet, how much more liquidity or capital could we bring to people, and opportunities to people? Because it's not just the capital; it's also the incentive to care about these people who you don't even know, via sort of investing in people in the same way that angel investing enables so much more cooperation, collaboration, and help from world-class CEOs and advisors such as yourself, because there's some economic upside, but also a special relationship that forms when you're on the cap table of a company.
If we get like money involved in all these relationships in a way, like, I mean, in some ways, I think it could be a feature, as you say, but it could be a bug too, right? You could have these like weird things. Like today it is often in relationships in a weird way. Like, you help people out with the kind of the expectation that, somehow that karma is going to get back to you in some sort of, it's not like purely altruistic often, right? Today, even though you're not like directly making money off this person. And maybe this kind of like unstated, like that it could come back to you. It's kind of good to have this ambiguity. Whereas like if there's like a direct, well, you're calling me for help. Am I investor in you? Well, hold on. What's the price? Well, since you're low, right? Can I just get in right now at the low price? Then I'll help you. Or like, how do you think that will kind of, move forward?
Yeah, economic relationships have the power to advance personal relationships when things are going well and people are happy and they have the right mindset about it. But they also have the chance, the opportunity to really complicate relationships. And there is something, sacred. Like, I wouldn't want my mom to have economic upside in me, such that I feel like
in that case she does. So that is different. Where like she actually does. Like, I have a direct economic upside in my kids, right? And I have a direct economic upside in my spouse, and even in my siblings in some ways. Like, if they do better, like maybe I'll go on better vacations or something, right? So like there are those types of things. You're like your closest friend. You're really talking about the more of the acquaintance.
Right.
Type of person, right?
I guess I would say with my mom, I don't want a ticker that rises up and down every day based on.
Good point. Yeah, you don't want to know how you're doing. Yeah, as part of your wealth manager portfolio or something. Yeah, have your mom.
Exactly. Another complication. There's this book, The Unincorporated Man, which is a book of science fiction that imagines a world where everyone has upside in each other, and where it gets really complicated there is on the governance side. Where if people have economic upside, do they start making recommendations? Do they start having control of your life? And so, things can get really complicated. And so, people have to have the right expectations going into it. It takes a certain level of maturity. It introduces more variance for sure. And there is something sacred about a relationship that doesn't have economics or can be something sacred about a relationship that doesn't have economics.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like for certain, let's say, government roles or something, like you have to liquidate your entire stock portfolio because you don't want to have even a very, very small interest in some sort of company that you might be engaging with or something. But
Totally.
if you have this portfolio of people, some of which you might be working with in the government, it is, you do have some sort of like odd incentive to favor certain people over others. It'd be very interesting. And
Well,
today, maybe you only have that with like your family. There's like a nepotistic, thing. Whereas like you can imagine a scenario where like you have a much bigger portfolio of people.
Well, it's funny because the East Coast mindset is, if you conflict of interest, right? If you have, but the West Coast mindset is skin in the game. Like the West Coast, like if you
no conflict, no interest.
Exactly. Like if you send me something and I'm like, wait, you're not invested in this company or this person, like, why are you even sending this to me? Like, you don't even believe it. Your reputation is not credible. Whereas, the East Coast mindset is if you are involved, you must be promoting only because you're financially incentivized. Whereas the West Coast is, oh, you believe in it. That's why you did it.
That's right. Yeah. I believed in this person so much that I invested in her.
Yeah.
Okay. Interesting. Yeah. Now you've also written a lot about like the concept of like a personal moat, some sort of specific skill set that you can develop an advantage in. Like, how do you think about this in like the world of AI?
Yeah. It's really interesting. So personal moat. In general, I recommend like thinking about careers in the same way you think about like products and companies, and this idea of what makes a product or a company have a sustainable, durable advantage. Similarly to personal moat, Naval, to your career, Naval has this framework around what's easy for you to do, but hard for others, or looks hard to others, as a way to think about where your personal moat could be. And usually, it's some combination of some unique expertise, some unique skill set, some unique set of relationships, and maybe the combination of those. Like I'm a pretty good community builder, but I think I'm world class at community building for founders. Like, so the more specific, the better. And when I do these personal moat exercises, I'll ask people what's their personal moat, and they might say something like, "Oh, I'm good at operations," and then I'll say, "Hey, where are you ranked in the world in your personal moat?" And the more narrow the personal moat is, the more the higher you'll be ranked in that. And that's the higher you're ranked, the more career capital you have, the more leverage you have on your time, the more people will pay you, the more people want to work with you, et cetera. So that's the idea of
also, it can be like there can be these weird things. If you think of this Venn diagram, this overlapping Venn diagram, where you become the number one in that overlapping Venn diagram of things. That actually could not. You're not just number one in that overlapping Venn diagram. Like those things together could really lead to great achievements. Like if you think of like, let's say you're a pretty good software developer, you're top 10%, but not the number one software developer, and like you're really into marine biology or something. Again, not anywhere close to number one, but you're in the top 10% of like people who are like really interested in marine biology. But you put those together, okay, you're number one in that kind of cross. But because of that, you understand like how dolphins communicate in a super interesting way, and that allows you to develop this like incredibly new technology or something.
Yeah, totally. And so to ask what does AI do to personal moats, I think it's worth just reflecting on what technology does to personal moats, which is I think it really creates this barbell where being the best just matters so much more. So let's use an example. Let's say you're Taylor Swift and you're in like the 1500s. You're the best musician of the era. But what can you really do, right? Recorded music doesn't exist. You can, so everyone just, listens to it live. If you're Taylor Swift, you can't reach that many people. And so there's just a much more kind of flat distribution of musicians. And then what happens with recorded music is you get to say, hey, I get to listen to the best musician possible, right? I don't have to listen to the person in my town. I can listen to Taylor Swift. So now if you're the best, you can reach, and especially when the internet comes, you can reach everybody. And the person who used to play in that town is not just competing with people in that town, it's competing with every musician. And thus the benefits of being the best, drastically increase. And if you're the middle class, you're no longer, if you're mid-level, you're no longer performing for money, at least in the same way. Although because discovery is so much easier, there's also this kind of barbell where there's a super long tail, and the hits get bigger, the long tail gets bigger, the middle shrinks. And it feels like that happens in every kind of sort of industry where there's a free market and free distribution, and it isn't regulated by the government. And so I suspect that AI will only increase that. Whereas, if you're the Taylor Swift, now AI can create sort of, remixes of your content, and we're already starting to do that in other fields. And so now people aren't kind of limited by their time as much, because AI can sort of extend their content and their time. And so I think it becomes even more important to be the best. But then also with AI, depending how far we go, like, you're also competing with the AI. And so if you're the best chess player and AI can beat chess like so easily, it can beat you in chess so easily, like, I don't know, is it as valuable to be the best chess player? Maybe people still value human chess, and that's really important. But those are a couple things that come to mind. I'm curious, how would you answer the same question?
Well, I guess the question is also, I mean, it might be harder to figure out what you should try to be number one in. Because being the number one singer seems extremely hard, and there probably is some sort of luck involved. Being the number one basketball player, well, for certain people, like, they just probably would know at age 7 that that's never going to happen, right? Right. So there's some sort of thing, like, so how do you pick that, like, Venn diagram overlap, as you mentioned, the community build or in startups or something that can still also be valuable and survive the onslaught of AI?
Yeah, it used to be, people would say, hey, go, be great at either something creative or something caring, because AI is not going to be able to do that.
Yeah.
And it turns out that's like the first thing it's able to do. And so I think it's interesting. I mean, I think one thing that's really going to be more important in the age of AI is trust and brand, because there's going to be so much explosions of content. You don't know what's true. You don't know what's real. You don't know who made what. Being able to have a trusted, strong brand is going to be immensely important. And so being able to dominate a niche, build credibility with that niche, be public with that niche, be transparent within the niche, and be consistent within that niche is going to be increasingly important. That's a little vague, and not every niche is going to matter in the same way. Sometimes it's hard to know, in the same way we didn't know, caring and creative fields were going to be the first to be disrupted, like we're seeing with the writers' strike. But that's one broad principle, which is, and Naval talks about this: be publicly accountable. Put yourself out there, build trust, build consistency, and build a reputation.
Speaking of Naval, there's this kind of like different archetypes of founders. There's some maybe you call it the Nirav or the Naval, the insider, the outsider, and you see people who are super successful in both of those things. Like, how do you think it through? How do you understand the dynamics of these types of people?
So I love this piece. I think you created a really strong conversation. I've been thinking about this piece a lot since you wrote it. And here's a question that will help set up my follow-up. Nirav and Naval, what does that comparison give you that Peter Thiel versus Reid Hoffman doesn't give you? Like, what do you? Anything?
Same thing. Yeah.
Same. Okay.
Yeah. So Peter is much more the outsider. Reid is much more the insider. They're actually really good friends, right? So they can still have deep respect for one another. And then they both have a little bit of the outsider has a little bit of the insider. The insider has a little bit of the outsider. It's not like the 100%, on the extreme, right? So I think it is kind of like you see a lot of these pairs over time.
And so is the crux of the difference that the outsider is willing to look dumb or, go against kind of the establishment, kind of like build outside of the, it's like anti-institutionalist, build something new versus kind of reshape an existing institution? Or what do you think is the main crux?
Well, I think it's safer to be an insider. And certainly, as you mentioned, if you think of the VC versus the entrepreneur, most of the VCs tend to be insiders with a few exceptions. They're much more likely to be wealthy, right? Yeah. And be respected and stuff like that. Obviously, the extreme entrepreneurs are even more wealthy and even more respected, but it's pretty rare.
Yes.
And so you have that, and then even outsiders, they often raise their kids to be insiders. So you have the hypocrisy that could even happen in their own family.
Totally. And so, okay, implicit in this idea of insiders and outsiders is this kind of overarching power structure that, includes like universities, the best universities, includes media, the best media, like the New York Times.
Yeah.
It includes sort of being favorable within sort of the cultural values and institutions that are created and adjacent to that. And so insiders rise up within those institutions. They're friendly to those, cultural values, and they're seen as good people. Whereas outsiders are willing to take bets that are, maybe outside of those, cultural values or policy recommendations, and they're willing to be seen as either dumb or potentially bad. And I like Peter Thiel and Reid Hoffman as an example, just because I'm more familiar with it, which is the idea of, hey, they went to the same school, they were really close friends, they worked at PayPal together, and Reid then, or Peter then became, much more contrarian over time, doing things that, irked people, like, starting Palantir, or, supporting Donald Trump was the biggest one, or fighting the media, taking down Gawker. Whereas Reid Hoffman has been a friend to, sort of, all media. He's been a friend to sort of the DNC, Democratic Party. And so they are kind of seen as very different ways. Now, here's what I think about it. I think in the same way there's a kind of founder market fit, there's also kind of like personality career fit. And so Reid Hoffman, he's a likable guy. He's an agreeable guy. And he's a unifier. He wants to bring people together. And so a personality like that is a perfect personality to start LinkedIn, right? To adopt, to get the whole world on one professional platform.
Yeah. That's exactly right. Yeah.
That's it. You need to be an insider. You need to be someone willing to bring people together. Now, if Peter Thiel is more, I don't know him, as well as you do, but he's more focused, I feel, on pursuit of truth, on pursuit of what's right. And, sometimes contrarians actually kind of enjoy being a bit contrarian. Like, it's just kind of their personality to, care about facts more than someone's, perception of facts or feelings of facts. And so if you have the ability or even the interest of being a contrarian, you're better off taking really contrarian bets, asymmetric upside bets, willing to look dumb, willing to look bad. And, supporting Trump was a pretty asymmetric bet, right? They gave him a tremendous amount of political capital, and he had like a 50% chance of winning, or maybe it was less at the time, but he, and other bets too. Now, it's worth noting that Reid has, made some outsider bets where it counts, in terms of he was early to crypto, he's early to AI, and so he tries to really bridge these, and he takes outsider bets in economic ways as well. Whereas Peter also, he's an outsider, and yet he's built and funded some major institutions that work with government, like Palantir and Anduril, and so he's developed a lot of political power. So he's kind of risen up within the world as well. And so what I think about insiders and outsiders is, I think a lot of it is personality, and you want personality, career fit. Balaji calls this social supply chain. Like, Joe Lonsdale can be kind of overtly right wing because he has every step of his supply chain, i.e. his customers, i.e. founders, his LPs, he is aligned with that. And so he has alignment with his entire supply chain in a way that someone else who doesn't have those same customers or doesn't have those same investors doesn't have the luxury of being. So one, I think it's understanding your personality, and then two, it's creating a supply chain or social network around of people who will align with that personality, so that you're better set up for success.
Yeah, and in the personality front, I think you're right. Like, if let's say you're an ambitious person, there are certain types of personalities can rise up, can do well, rise up through institutions, and certain types of personalities, even though they're very ambitious and very smart, would never be successful doing that, and they have no choice but to go outside the institutions because they're just not that type of, as you mentioned, more agreeable person to work well within those.
And if you're an outsider and you're going to work out, not go up the main path, I think working in fields where there's higher variance, it's like you want to do something your competitors won't do. So if you're an outsider, you want to do something insiders won't do. or can't do, right? And so taking bets on crypto super early when it looks dumb, as an example, or supporting a candidate that people may not like and Trump. So like I think the more high variance bets you can take as an outsider of things that insiders won't do, the better. And similarly, if you're an insider, if you have an insider personality, doing things that outsiders can't do, like it's really hard to build a set of relationships in government or healthcare or other things that are highly regulated. You need to be like really run by the book and a strong insider to do that. That's an unfair advantage.
Now, you've become kind of a public intellectual and philosopher, and I've known you for many, many years. I've seen this kind of evolution over time, and it seems like you're not the only one who's kind of evolved into becoming more of this like public intellectual. Like, why do you think it's become kind of I wouldn't say common, but why do you think it's not a crazily uncommon thing in tech?
I'm just a curious person. I'm certainly an amateur intellectual, but I'm obsessed with learning. And I think that here's why it's become a more common thing in tech, because a couple decades ago or a decade ago, you could just build your tech company and focus on the product and the team and the business. And what happened in the last decade is tech just got so big. I mean, software ate the world, or software is eating the world. And thus, you're not in a silo anymore. And if you're Facebook, you're dealing not just with the product and the business, you're dealing with politics every day. You're dealing with moral questions. And so I think tech has been really bad at in the last decade at sort of having kind of moral justification or being able to address these moral questions or these political questions. And politics is morality. Our public morality today is not religion, it's politics. And so when you're asking, say, hey, why is everything so political? It's because one, tech is just so powerful that's impacting everything, and two, different people have different ideas of how those things should be run, and those come to a head every single day. And so if you say, why are you interested in philosophy? Well, philosophy is, if politics is morals, philosophy is like morals, but even like zoomed out, even a layer deep, more abstraction. And so one, I think people in tech have had to become interested in politics and philosophy to run their companies better. But then two, I think tech people, have more power than they did a couple decades ago, and also get to have a say in how things should be run. And philosophy is a foundation to help take stabs at some of these critical questions.
You also host a bunch of like really great podcasts, Venture Stories, Miller Zen, Exact, Big Ideas, Cognitive Revolution, like all these different things out there. Like, why are you spending so much time on these podcasts? Like, why are you? And you're building out a podcast company. Like, why is that such an interesting thing for you to spend time on?
A few reasons. So first off, I think venture capital in general has become, it's obvious, become much more commodified and much more competitive. And in order to really do a good job, you need to have an unfair advantage. And I got into angel investing while I was at Product Hunt, and I discovered the benefits of an unfair advantage in terms of, I could give startups distribution, I can get them customers. Now I'm getting the best startups to come take my capital, and I wanted to have more of these unfair advantages, things that help startups in a productized way with their biggest challenges. And what are the biggest challenges? Getting customers, hiring people. And so after Product Hunt, I created On Deck that helped people find early co-founders or early hires. And so I'm interested in creating more of these unfair advantages. You look at people like Packy McCormick or Harry Stebbing, Lenny Rachitsky, who've become these successful investors without rising the ranks of working at a venture capital firm. They built distribution because startups need distribution, startups need customers. So I'm building a media company. It's called Turpentine. And one of the reasons is because I want distribution and also niche distribution. And so what Lenny has done for products, for product managers, and what Harry has done for venture capitalists, I believe will exist for every niche, for every buyer, for every sector. And the future of media is much more niche as the world just gets more specialized. And so I'm interested in creating these niche business media properties. Now, podcasting is the first format I've chosen because I think it's tremendously underserved. Like some people might say, aren't we late in podcasting? Podcasts have existed forever. I think the best podcasts do not exist yet. And I as evidence of this, I would say, hey, All In's the #1 tech podcast. It just started during the pandemic.
Yeah.
Andrew Huberman, I think, was the #1 podcast in the world. It just started in 2021. I bet if you look at the top 50 right now in tech in 2023 versus in 2026, it's going to look very different. And it's because podcasting has just been too high friction for people to do. Like, David Sachs, Chamath, Friedberg, if Jason Calacanis wasn't doing all the ops, they would have never started this. And so how many other amazing people out there could have...
Also, they're already outside of massive distribution.
That's true.
If they have millions of followers between them already,
yes,
on Twitter and et cetera, they're already very well known folks. Like for a lot of people, even with good products, there are some podcasts I listen to which I think are excellent that maybe don't have a ton of listeners because it's hard to find out about them, right? You find out kind of slowly through word of mouth, I presume, mostly, right? Or maybe cross promotion between these podcasts.
Yeah. Podcast discovery is hard. And then, so I'm also making a bet that that's going to improve. The analytics are terrible. Discovery is terrible. But I think we're the early innings of podcasts, both that the technology doesn't exist yet. And yeah, to your point, the best way...
Could you even run... I don't even think you can run ads for a podcast, right? On Apple Podcast or something like that, right?
You could do it on Overcast and other things. But but otherwise it's absolutely terrible. But because it's terrible, podcast listeners are far more loyal. It's hard. So once you get them, you get them for a long time. And so, the best way is cross promotion with other podcasts. And that's why we're creating a network to be able to do that. And also automate logistics so that more, the busiest people who have the most expertise and big audience can now have shows. And if you think about it, like the people who have knowledge in this world will never write a book. And they won't even write a blog. The people with the most knowledge are too busy to write blog posts even sometimes. But they'll do interviews. That's the lowest friction way of transmitting knowledge. And so I see as interviews and podcasts as kind of capturing what Sam Obergia calls intellectual dark matter, i.e., information that's in people's heads that doesn't exist in the internet yet.
And I've learned a lot from you over the years about how to actually interview people and create a good podcast and stuff like that. What are some of your tips on how to interview well?
Yeah, I have a blog post we could share about lessons learned from doing 500 podcasting, 500 podcasts.
You've now done 500?
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. Okay. Holy mackerel, that's a lot.
Yeah, I think a key to, a good interview is a good conversation. And so it's the interview itself. It has to be something that you are fascinated by. Like, I'm fascinated in this conversation. If you're bored during conversation, your audience is bored too. And so would you get the sense listening to All In, as an example, is that's the conversation they would have if no one was listening?
Yep. That's right.
So that's what you want to do. You want to be a fly on the wall of people.
Some interesting people.
Yeah.
Right.
And it's got to be what All In figured out. It's informative and entertaining. It's immensely entertaining. And they
have fun.
Yes. And you feel like podcasts are your best friend. So podcast is such a intimate medium. My First Million has also done a phenomenal job, Sam Parr and Sean Puri, of they're really close friends, and you feel, even if you've never met them, that you're close friends with them too, that you're exposed to that intimacy, and that's entertaining and fulfilling, and you're also learning something. And so I think most podcasts try to be too much informative, but hey, you gotta be entertaining as well.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of them are. For a while, you had these ones that got really well produced, right? And they have lots of sound effects and this and that and these other things that came in, and obviously that's expensive and takes a lot of time to produce it. And I don't know about you, but I don't know that I don't think that's necessarily negative, but it doesn't seem like it's much of a positive either.
Yeah, I think if you're doing a true crime podcast or you're doing some sort of real storytelling, that
makes sense. Yeah.
If you're This American Life, sure, that's awesome. But yeah, if you're, a business podcast, if you're a tech podcast, you want just to be a fascinating conversation and let it speak for itself. There are a number of tech podcasts that are too well produced, in my opinion. Like it's too forced, and I'm like, hey, just take all that stuff out. I just want to hear the conversation that they're having. So I agree.
Okay, interesting. Now, last question. The last question we ask all of our guests: what conventional wisdom or advice do you think is generally bad advice? You already gave one answer, but now I'm excited to hear your second answer.
Yeah. So my first answer was to make commitments early and find that it builds optionality, because what you chain yourself to can set you free. My other bad advice that I think people give too much is to really focus on being internally motivated or intrinsically sort of oriented. And I think we've had this great, reorientation from external sort of, you know, the guidance should be you should do what other people tell you to do from you should do what you yourself want to do. And I think that's been a positive reorientation to some degree, but I think the pendulum has swung too far to this idea that I should always pursue my passion. I should always enjoy everything that I'm doing, that the goal in life is for me to feel kind of happy or, connected at all times. And really, my true self knows what I should, and only I knows what I should do. And I need to, back in the day when religion was more prominent, you would go to someone who served the role of a therapist, and they would kind of contextualize your feelings in the context of serving society or serving this broader mission, and help you kind of rationalize them and kind of shape yourself to fit society. And now we're so focused on the opposite, shaping society to fit ourselves.
So much. Do you think it's like too egotistical? Is that what this advice is? Okay.
Yes, too egotistical. But also, I think there's this idea of like, short run happiness and long run happiness. Short run happiness is like what feels good in the moment, and things must feel good at all moments. Versus long run happiness, this idea of looking back at your life and the things that you accomplished and the commitments that you made and the set of relationships that you had. And I sometimes think they're more at odds than we think. And sometimes, or often, long run happiness requires a sort of sacrifice of short term happiness. It requires some suffering, as Catherine Boyle put recently in a blog post, of how we don't want to suffer at all. But a lot of the things that we're most proud of, I mean, a small example is in order to become fit, you have to work hard, and you might not. Yeah. It was that phrase: everyone wants to be fit, but no one wants to lift those heavy ass weights. And so there's all sorts of places where that requires. It's like, you want to be successful, you have to work late nights, you have to sacrifice things. And so I think by being more externally oriented, I'm not saying, hey, only, focus on, status or what people think of you, care only about it. But I think, thinking about what your partner thinks, thinking about what your best friends think, thinking about what the people that you respect think, it's a way to kind of get out of yourself in this kind of incessant, like, I don't think ourselves have all the answers. I don't think looking inwards has all the answers. I think there's this great symbiosis between serving sort of your community, serving your people, serving a mission, serving society, and serving yourself. And I think we've over-rotated too much on needing to figure everything out via interiority, in a way that is not natural and not how most people figure things out in society. And I think I think more people can benefit more from being more externally oriented, and focus, on external, how they could serve other people, as opposed to just focusing on how other people serve themselves. And not just, hey, be selfless, but also trust a little bit less one's internal guidance of what's going to make them happy. Because there's a famous thing of Dan Ariely, I think, or someone says, hey, to know whether you're in a good relationship, ask your friends, because you can't really trust your gut. You're too biased. But your friends who've seen you interact for months and years, they'll have a pretty good assessment. And I think, like, having a sense for long-term happiness, in some ways it's complicated in the same way that trying to trade stocks is complicated. Like, it's pretty complex. There's a lot of things to model. And so it's, in some ways, it's better to like buy or hold or to kind of outsource it to other people who can think more soberly or have, or less biased. And so similarly, when thinking about long run happiness, like, putting less, trying to sort of time the market or trade on a individual level, I would have less trust in that. How's that for some advice?
I think that's really interesting. When you think about happiness in general, like, there are some people who just have like an extremely high level of baseline happiness, and they might deviate from that. And occasionally something maybe really bad happen, or whatever, but they're generally at a very high level. And then there's people who are at a like relatively low level, And again, they might deviate occasionally, something like really great happens or something like that. Like, how does your advice change depending on like the person that you're talking to? Like, I've known you for years. You seem at least outwardly like an extremely happy person every time I've talked to you. But you may have a different calibration of what your baseline is.
Yeah, I think I'm a pretty happy person. I think so. I can only give advice to people like me, but I think there are a lot of times where I thought I was unhappy or really annoyed at something, or I ascribed this greater meaning to something when actually I was hungry or I hadn't worked out or there was something in my like body chemistry that just wasn't working, but I didn't realize what was going on. And I think that actually happens to a lot of people. I think a lot of people don't sleep well, don't eat well, don't exercise, or don't do these like very basic things that make them, irritable or annoyed or unhappy. And then they blame other things in their life that actually have nothing to do with some of those core reasons. So one way I think about it is to like set a proper foundation. And then also in general, in terms of like, depending on who's like, some people are just more anxious than other people. And I would, if that was me, what I would do is I would really reflect on the past anxiety I thought I might have, or like evaluate, hey, I've been anxious a lot about how certain outcomes would happen. Did those outcomes happen? No. Okay. Maybe I should either be less anxious, or if I can't control it, just kind of like don't trust it, in the sense of like, let it happen, but it's okay. Like, bad feelings come and go. That's not the end of the world. Like, I'll be, baseline level, anxious or unhappy, and I could still have a really fulfilling, meaningful life. Like that's okay.
And it also even depends on context. I certainly don't think I'm an anxious person, but on an airplane, if there's a ton of turbulence, like, I get anxious.
Me too. I get really scared of turbulence, even though I know it's really irrational.
It totally happened to me like 1,000 times in the past, right? And every other time it worked out fine, right? But I'm still get a little jittery and a little worried about it. And you just have to just be like, okay, this is how I'm going to cope with this particular thing, even though I know it's not rational, even like everybody's got something like that somewhere.
Totally. Yeah. People often give cope a bad name, but I think we need copes to get through the day. And so, I'll be scared of every turbulence. And I also know it's okay to be like, that's just, who I am.
That's who I am. I'm a little scared. Exactly. Just, don't talk to me about my innermost feelings during that one moment of like, bouncing up and down in the sky.
And related to this is where like stoicism comes into play a little bit, where, so some people critique stoicism and they'll say, hey, it's just a cope that, it's like accepting how things are, and you're not willing to change them. And I think the wisdom is knowing when you should actually change something and not be okay with a certain thing, and when it's actually totally fine. It's better. It's more prudent. It's more, smarter to just accept, hey, we're just going to have turbulence on airplanes, and it's kind of no big deal.
Yeah, in some ways, also, like, if you there could be something like you decide like whether I should change or not, like I don't know, whether I should live in the same city or not, or something, right? And if you actually like affirmatively decide to stay rather than just like letting it happen to you, if you say, oh, actually, I like living in this state, I'm just going to stay living here for another year, another 5 years, or whatever you decide in your head, or something like that, then like it's even like it's even greater because you've like made a recommitment to it.
Yeah. I think part of adulthood is just realizing that you can't do everything, and decisions are path dependent, but it doesn't mean you should delay them. Like you have to, and I think people are they struggle so much to make decisions because then they say, okay, but that takes this option off the table. Yeah. And I think adulthood is taking options off the table so that the options that you do pick, you can fully dedicate oneself. And that's full circle on this conversation.
I love it. Okay. Well, thank you, Erik Torenberg, for joining us. World of That. I follow you at Erik Torenberg on Twitter. I subscribe to your Substack. I listen to at least 3 of your podcasts. So I definitely encourage all of our listeners to engage with you there. There's been a lot of fun.
Thanks so much, Auren. I've modeled my career in some ways after yours, so I've looked up to you for.
I'm sorry about that.
Yeah, no, I'm grateful for your friendship and mentorship. Thanks so much, Auren.